The sound of gunfire echoed through the valley as Beatrice Marlowe ran for her life, her white wedding dress fluttering behind her like the wings of a frightened dove. Crimson stains bloomed across the delicate lace and satin, some hers, most belonging to the man she'd been about to marry just 20 minutes earlier. The year was 1875, and what should have been the happiest day of her life had descended into a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Beatrice stumbled, her dress catching on sagebrush as she fled across the dusty terrain of the New Mexico territory. Her lungs burned with each desperate breath, and her mind still couldn't comprehend the violence that had erupted in the small church of Silver Creek. One moment, she had been walking down the aisle toward Charles Winters, the banker's son and her fiancé of 6 months. The next, the doors had burst open, and 3 masked men had stormed in with guns blazing. In the chaos, Charles had fallen first, a bullet striking him squarely in the chest as he moved to protect her. The spray of his blood had painted her dress in a grotesque pattern as he collapsed into her arms. The screams of the wedding guests still rang in her ears as she ran, directionless, into the wilderness surrounding the town. Night was falling, and Beatrice knew she wouldn't survive long in the desert. Her wedding shoes, dainty white satin things, were already torn to shreds, and her bare feet bled from cuts and scrapes. Still, she pressed on, the distant sound of hoofbeats driving her forward. The men who had attacked the church were still hunting her, she was certain of it. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, Beatrice's strength finally gave out. She collapsed behind a large boulder, pulling her blood-stained dress tight around her body against the rapidly cooling night air. Tears streamed down her face as the reality of her situation crashed over her. Charles was dead. Her parents, who had been sitting in the front row, might be dead too, and she was alone in the wilderness, being hunted by killers for reasons she couldn't fathom. The sound of approaching hoofbeats jerked her from her thoughts. Beatrice pressed herself against the boulder, trying to make herself as small as possible. The hoofbeats slowed and then stopped altogether. She held her breath, praying that whoever it was would move on. "Hello." A man's voice called out. "I know someone's out here. I've been tracking you for the past mile." Beatrice remained silent, though her heart hammered so loudly in her chest she feared he might hear it. "I'm not looking to hurt you," the voice continued. "I heard the shots from town, saw you running. If you're in trouble, I can help." The voice didn't sound like any of the men from the church, but Beatrice wasn't taking any chances. She reached down and picked up a jagged rock, clutching it tightly in her trembling hand. "Listen," the man said, his voice closer now. "It's going to be below freezing tonight. If you're injured, which I'm guessing you are, from the blood trail you won't make it till morning out here. I've got a cabin about 2 miles north. Food, water, medical supplies." Beatrice's throat tightened. Even if this stranger meant her no harm, how could she trust anyone after what had happened? The man sighed audibly. "I'm going to step away from my horse. I'm unarmed. You can come out or you can stay hidden, but I'm leaving a canteen of water and a blanket right here. If you change your mind about needing help, I'll be at my cabin. Follow the creek northward, you can't miss it." Beatrice heard the soft sounds of movement, then retreating footsteps. After several minutes of silence, she dared to peek around the edge of the boulder. In the faint moonlight, she could make out a canteen and a folded blanket on the ground. The stranger and his horse were nowhere to be seen. Her thirst won out over her fear. Beatrice crawled forward and grabbed the canteen, unscrewing the cap with shaking hands and taking a desperate gulp. The water was cool and fresh, bringing immediate relief to her parched throat. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, its rough wool a comfort against the biting cold that had settled over the desert. With water and warmth, Beatrice's mind cleared enough to consider her options. She could continue running, but to where? She didn't know this territory well enough to navigate in the dark. The stranger's cabin offered shelter and safety, assuming he was telling the truth. And if he wasn't? Well, she'd already escaped death once today. Gathering her strength, Beatrice pulled herself to her feet, She would follow the creek as the man had instructed. If she sensed any danger, she would disappear into the night. But for now, the promise of shelter was too tempting to ignore. The journey seemed interminable. Every shadow looked like a threat, every sound a pursuer. The moonlight revealed the path along the creek, but also illuminated the pitiful state of her dress, once a symbol of hope and new beginnings, now a tattered, blood-soaked reminder of tragedy. When Beatrice finally spotted the cabin, it appeared as a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, and a single window glowed with warm light. She approached cautiously, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. Before she could reach the door, it swung open, spilling golden light onto the ground. Silhouetted in the doorway stood a tall figure, a man in the unmistakable garb of a cowboy, hat and all. "You decided to come," he said, his voice the same one from earlier. "I'm glad. You look half frozen." Beatrice stood frozen, still clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. The man stepped aside, giving her a clear view into the cabin. "You don't. But I give you my word as a man that no harm will come to you under my roof. And out here in these parts, a man's word is all he's got." Something in his voice, a steadiness, an honesty, made Beatrice take a step forward. As she moved into the light, she saw the man's expression change as he took in her appearance. His eyes widened at the sight of her blood-stained wedding dress. "Good Lord," he breathed. "What happened to you?" Beatrice felt tears welling up again. "They killed him," she whispered. "They killed everyone." Her legs gave way beneath her, but before she could hit the ground, the cowboy lunged forward and caught her. He lifted her easily, carrying her into the warmth of the cabin and gently setting her down on a chair near the fire. "My name's Nathaniel," he said quietly, kneeling before her. "Nathaniel Reed, and I promise you you're safe now." In the firelight, Beatrice could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with a face weathered by sun and wind, but handsome nonetheless. His eyes were a striking blue, filled with concern as they assessed her condition. "Beatrice," she replied. "Beatrice Marlowe." Then, looking down at her ruined dress, she added bitterly, "Almost Beatrice Winters." Nathaniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm going to get you some clean clothes and something to eat. Then, if you're willing, you can tell me what happened." He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, retrieving a shirt and pants from a trunk at the foot of his bed. "They'll be too big," he apologized, "but they're clean. There's a screen in the corner where you can change. I'll heat up some stew while you do." Beatrice accepted the clothes with murmured thanks. Behind the privacy screen, she peeled off her wedding dress, wincing as dried blood made the fabric stick to her skin in places. The dress had cost her parents 3 months' wages, a beautiful creation of satin and lace that she had tried on only twice before the wedding day, afraid of damaging it. Now it was beyond salvation, a tattered, bloodied ruin. Nathaniel's clothes engulfed her. The pants had to be rolled up multiple times, and the shirt hung to her knees, but they were blessedly clean and warm. When she emerged from behind the screen, she found him ladling stew into a bowl at a small table. "Sit," he urged. "Eat something. You look like you haven't had food in days." It had only been hours since she'd last eaten, nervously picking at breakfast as her mother fussed over her hair and veil, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Beatrice sat at the table and took a spoonful of the stew. It was simple fare: beef, potatoes, and carrots in a savory broth, but at that moment, it tasted better than any wedding feast could have. As she ate, Nathaniel sat across from her, quietly sipping a cup of coffee. He didn't press her to speak, and for that, Beatrice was grateful. The simple act of eating warm food in a safe place was enough to make her feel human again. When she finally set down her spoon, Nathaniel refilled her water cup and waited. "It was my wedding day," Beatrice began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything was perfect. The church was full of flowers. Charles, my fiancé, was waiting for me at the altar. I had just started walking down the aisle when 3 men burst in. She paused, the memory of gunfire and screams threatening to overwhelm her again. They were wearing bandanas over their faces. One of them shouted something about revenge, then they started shooting. Beatrice's hand trembled as she reached for her water. Charles tried to shield me. He was hit, right in front of me. His blood, it went everywhere, on my dress, on my face. People were screaming, running. I don't even remember how I got out. I just ran and ran. Nathaniel's face had hardened as she spoke, his jaw clenched tight. These men, he said carefully, did you recognize any of them? Even with the bandanas, Beatrice shook her head. No, but they knew Charles, or at least they seemed to. The one who shouted mentioned a name, Wilson or Williams, something like that. She looked up suddenly. You don't think they'll come looking for me, do you? I don't know, Nathaniel answered honestly, but you're safe here for now. My cabin's far enough from town that most folks don't even know it exists, and I'm well equipped to handle trouble if it comes knocking. His words should have been reassuring, but they only reminded Beatrice of the danger she might have brought to his doorstep. I should leave in the morning, she said. I can't put you at risk. Nathaniel shook his head firmly. You're not going anywhere until you're healed up and we figure out what's going on. Silver Creek's the nearest town, and if what you say is true, it's not safe for you there right now. He stood up and moved to a cabinet, pulling out a small wooden box. Let me see those feet of yours. I noticed you were limping pretty badly. Beatrice hesitated, then extended her feet. They were a mess of cuts and scratches, some still oozing blood. Nathaniel knelt down and gently took one foot in his hands. His touch was surprisingly tender as he cleaned each wound with water and a clean cloth, then applied a salve that smelled strongly of herbs. Where did you learn to do this? Beatrice asked, trying to distract herself from both the pain and the strange intimacy of the moment. My mother was a healer, Nathaniel replied, focusing on his task. Taught me everything she knew before she passed. Out here, being able to tend your own wounds can mean the difference between life and death. As he wrapped her feet in clean bandages, Beatrice studied him more closely. Despite his rough exterior, there was a gentleness to Nathaniel Reed that belied his imposing size. His hands, though calloused from work, moved with a healer's precision. Thank you, she said quietly when he was finished. For everything, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me. Nathaniel stood up, returning the medical supplies to their box. No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. But Beatrice knew that wasn't true. In her 22 years, she had learned that kindness like his was rare, especially from strangers. You should get some rest, Nathaniel said, gesturing to the bed in the corner. Take my bed, I'll sleep by the fire. Beatrice wanted to protest, but exhaustion was overtaking her rapidly. She could barely keep her eyes open. Just for tonight, she conceded. And tomorrow we'll figure out what to do. Nathaniel nodded, then hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. That dress of yours, he said finally, the wedding dress. It may seem ruined now with all that blood, but I want you to know something. His blue eyes held hers steadily. You're still a bride in my eyes. Whatever happened today doesn't change that. The fact that you're alive, that you survived, that's what matters. Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes at his unexpected words of kindness. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a truth she wasn't ready to accept. That she was no longer the bride she had been that morning, but a survivor of something she didn't yet understand. As she slipped under the covers of Nathaniel's bed, the events of the day crashed over her like a wave. She curled into herself, trying to muffle her sobs in the pillow. Across the room, Nathaniel busied himself with banking the fire, giving her the privacy to grieve. Sleep claimed her eventually, a deep, exhausted slumber that not even nightmares could penetrate. When Beatrice awoke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's small windows, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. Nathaniel stood at the stove, his back to her. He had changed into a fresh shirt, and his hair, a rich brown that caught golden highlights in the sunlight, was damp as if he'd just washed it. "Morning," he said without turning around, somehow sensing that she was awake. "Hope you're hungry." Beatrice sat up, wincing as her battered body protested the movement. "Starving, actually," she admitted, surprised by her own appetite after yesterday's trauma. Nathaniel turned with a plate of bacon, eggs, and biscuits, setting it on the table. "Eat up. We've got a lot to talk about." As they ate breakfast, Nathaniel laid out what he knew. "I rode into Silver Creek at first light," he said. "Kept to the outskirts, but I saw enough. The town's in an uproar. Sheriffs got posses forming, looking for the men who shot up the church." Beatrice's heart raced. "The church?" "We're there. How many?" "3 dead," Nathaniel said gently. "Your fiancé, the preacher, and one of the guests, an older man." "My father," Beatrice whispered, her fork clattering to the plate. Nathaniel shook his head quickly. "No, not your father. From what I overheard, your parents are both alive, though your mother's beside herself with worry about you. Most folks think you were taken by the attackers." Relief flooded through Beatrice, followed immediately by guilt for feeling relieved when others had died. "I should go back," she said. "Let them know I'm alive." "That might not be wise just yet," Nathaniel cautioned. "Those men weren't just random bandits. They came specifically for your wedding, specifically for Charles. And from what folks are saying in town, this has something to do with a land dispute between the Winters family and a rancher named Wilson." Beatrice frowned. "Wilson, that was the name. The man shouted something about Wilson getting justice." Nathaniel nodded grimly. "Jacob Wilson. He had a small ranch north of town. Word is, the bank foreclosed on it 3 months back, a bank where Charles's father is the president. Wilson lost everything. His wife took sick without proper medicine, died last month. And he blamed the Winters family," Beatrice concluded, the pieces falling into place. "But why target the wedding? Why not go after Mr. Winters directly? What better way to hurt a man than to destroy his son's future?" Nathaniel replied. "But here's where it gets complicated. Jacob Wilson was found dead in his barn 2 weeks ago. Hanged himself, according to the sheriff. So whoever attacked your wedding, it wasn't him." Beatrice felt a chill run down her spine. "His sons, friends?" "That's my guess. Wilson had 2 sons, both in their 20s. They disappeared right after their father's death, and there was a ranch hand, loyal to Wilson for years. He's missing too." "So 3 men," Beatrice said, connecting the dots. "The same number that attacked the church," Nathaniel nodded. "The sheriff's convinced it's them. Problem is, no one knows where they are, and if they find out you survived and can identify them—" "They'll come after me," Beatrice finished, her appetite suddenly gone. "Which is why I think you should stay here, at least for a few days," Nathaniel said. "My cabin's off any main trails. Few people even know it exists. You'll be safe here while the sheriff tracks down the Wilson boys." Beatrice considered his offer. The logical part of her knew he was right. Returning to town now could be dangerous, both for her and for anyone sheltering her. But staying here, alone with a man she barely knew, went against everything she'd been taught was proper. As if reading her thoughts, Nathaniel added, "I know it's not ideal. A young woman staying unchaperoned with a stranger. But these are unusual circumstances. And I give you my word, I'll be a gentleman." There was something in the straightforward way he said it, without artifice or hidden meaning, that made Beatrice believe him completely. "All right," she agreed. "A few days, but I need to get word to my parents somehow. They must be frantic." "I can take a message next time I go to town," Nathaniel offered. "Something only they would understand, so they know it's really from you, but vague enough that it won't give away your location if it falls into the wrong hands." It was a sensible suggestion, and Beatrice nodded gratefully. "Thank you for everything. I don't know why you're helping me like this, but I'm grateful." Nathaniel's expression softened slightly. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be hunted, to need someone to trust when the world turns against you." He didn't elaborate further, and Beatrice didn't press him. They all had their secrets out here in the West. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Beatrice's feet healed quickly under Nathaniel's care, and soon she was able to move around the cabin without pain. She insisted on making herself useful, taking over the cooking and mending some of Nathaniel's clothes that had been piled in a corner awaiting repair. For his part, Nathaniel treated her with unfailing courtesy, always giving her privacy, always speaking to her with respect. He spent much of each day outside hunting, checking trap lines, tending to his small garden and the 2 horses in the lean-to stable behind the cabin. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Beatrice learned that Nathaniel had come west from Pennsylvania 5 years earlier, after serving in the war. He'd worked as a ranch hand, a tracker, and occasionally as a guide for hunting parties, before deciding he preferred the solitude of his own small homestead. He didn't talk much about his past before the war, and Beatrice sensed those were wounds still too raw to share. In turn, she told him about growing up in Silver Creek, the daughter of the town's schoolteacher. About meeting Charles when his family moved to town 3 years ago, bringing wealth and opportunity to the struggling mining community. Their courtship had been proper and predictable, exactly what a young woman should want, according to her mother. "Did you love him?" Nathaniel asked one evening, the question hanging in the air between them like smoke. Beatrice stared into the fire, considering. "I thought I did," she answered finally. "He was kind and handsome, and my parents approved. Everyone said we were a perfect match." She paused. "But now, looking back, I'm not sure I knew him well enough to truly love him. We never really talked about important things. Dreams, fears, it was also surface." Nathaniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's how it is for most folks. Marriage is a practical arrangement, especially out here. Love, if it comes at all, comes later." "Is that why you never married?" Beatrice asked, then immediately regretted her boldness. "I'm sorry, that was too personal," but Nathaniel didn't seem offended. "No, it's a fair question. I came close once, back east before the war. But then I saw things, did things, that changed me. Came back a different man. Didn't think it would be fair to saddle a woman with what I'd become." He shrugged. "Besides, I like my solitude. You don't seem like a man who needs to be alone," Beatrice observed. "You've been nothing but kind and sociable with me." A faint smile touched Nathaniel's lips. "Maybe you're the exception that proves the rule." The words hung between them, charged with a meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Beatrice felt her cheeks flush and looked away, suddenly very interested in the sewing in her lap. On the 4th day, Nathaniel rode into town for supplies and news. Beatrice spent the day anxiously awaiting his return, jumping at every sound outside the cabin. By the time he finally appeared in the doorway, the sun was setting, and she had nearly worn a path in the floorboards from pacing. "You're back," she said, relief evident in her voice. "What news?" Nathaniel removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Mixed." The sheriff's tracked the Wilson boys to a camp about 20 miles south. He's gathering a larger posse before moving in. "Your parents are well, though worried sick. I managed to slip your note to your mother without anyone noticing." Beatrice had written a simple message. "Remember the bluebird's nest we found when I was 10? I am safe in another nest now. Wait for me." Referring to a private memory only her mother would recognize. "And the bad news?" she asked, sensing there was more. Nathaniel's expression grew grim. "One of the Wilson boys, the younger one, was seen back in town last night. He was asking questions about you, whether your body had been found. Seems they think you might have escaped, and they're not happy about it." Fear clutched at Beatrice's heart. "Do they know where I am?" "No," Nathaniel assured her. "No one knows about this cabin except a few old trappers who aren't likely to talk to the likes of the Wilson boys. But it means you can't go back to town yet. Not until the sheriff has all 3 of them in custody." Beatrice sank into a chair, the weight of her situation pressing down on her. "I'm putting you in danger by staying here," she said quietly. "If they find out you're harboring me—" "They won't," Nathaniel said firmly. And even if they did, I can handle myself. I'm not afraid of men like that." Something in his tone made Beatrice look up sharply. There was a hardness in his eyes she hadn't seen before, a glimpse of the man who had survived the war and whatever had come after. "You've dealt with their kind before," she said. It wasn't a question. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Let's just say I understand men who think violence is the answer to their problems." He removed his gun belt, hanging it on a peg by the door, a familiar ritual she had watched each evening. "I've brought something for you," he added, his tone lightening as he reached into his saddlebag. He pulled out a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much, but I thought you might be tired of wearing my old clothes." Beatrice unwrapped the package to find a simple blue calico dress and a pair of sturdy women's boots. "How did you?" "General store had them," Nathaniel explained, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. "Guessed at the size. Told the shopkeeper they were for my sister back east." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Beatrice deeply. The dress wasn't fancy, nothing like her wedding gown or the fashionable dresses she'd owned in town, but it was clean and new and, most importantly, her own. "Thank you," she said, running her fingers over the fabric. "This means more than you know." Nathaniel nodded, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "There's something else," he said, reaching again into his saddlebag. He hesitated, then pulled out a small pistol. "I think you should have this. Know how to use it." Beatrice shook her head. Her father had always kept guns in their home, but she had never been taught to handle them. "I'll teach you," Nathaniel said. "Out here, a woman on her own needs to know how to protect herself." The implication that she would soon be on her own again sent an unexpected pang through Beatrice's chest. Of course, she couldn't stay with Nathaniel forever. Once the Wilson boys were caught, she would return to town, to her parents, to her life. The realization filled her with a strange melancholy. The next morning, Nathaniel took her a short distance from the cabin to teach her how to shoot. He was a patient teacher, showing her how to hold the small pistol, how to aim, how to squeeze rather than pull the trigger. "Remember," he said, standing close behind her to adjust her stance, "it's not about strength. It's about steadiness and control." Beatrice was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his body just inches from hers, of his hands gently correcting her grip on the pistol. It had been years since she had been this close to a man who wasn't a relative, and never with the kind of awareness she felt now. When she finally squeezed the trigger and hit the can he had set up as a target, her delight was genuine. "I did it," she exclaimed, turning to him with a wide smile. Nathaniel's answering smile transformed his face, erasing the habitual seriousness and making him look younger, almost boyish. "You're a natural," he said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. They practiced for another hour, until Beatrice could consistently hit the target and felt comfortable handling the weapon. As they walked back to the cabin, a comfortable silence between them, she found herself studying Nathaniel's profile against the backdrop of the mountains. In just a few days, this man had gone from stranger to protector to what? Friend seemed too simple a word for the complex emotions swirling inside her. "What will you do?" Nathaniel asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "After, I mean, when it's safe for you to go back." Beatrice had been wondering the same thing. "I don't know," she admitted. "Go back to my parents' house, I suppose. Help my father with the school." The future that had once seemed so clear, marriage to Charles, a home of her own, children now stretched before her as a blank canvas. "You could leave," Nathaniel suggested. "Start fresh somewhere else. Denver, maybe, or San Francisco. A young woman with education has options these days." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Beatrice had never considered a life beyond Silver Creek. "I could," she said slowly. "But I'd need money, connections, and my parents, I couldn't just abandon them." Nathaniel nodded, understanding. "Just something to think about. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to us is having our plans destroyed, forces us to consider possibilities we never would have otherwise." It was a profound observation from a man who had clearly experienced his own share of destroyed plans. Beatrice wondered, not for the first time, what had really brought Nathaniel Reed to this isolated cabin in the New Mexico territory. As they approached the cabin, Nathaniel suddenly stopped, holding up a hand for silence. His entire demeanor changed in an instant, alert and tense like a predator scenting danger. "What is it?" Beatrice whispered, fear clutching at her throat. "Someone's been here," Nathaniel said quietly, drawing his pistol. "The door's open, just a crack. I always latch it when we leave." Beatrice's hand went to the small pistol tucked into the pocket of her new dress. "The Wilson boys, maybe stay behind me." They approached the cabin cautiously. Nathaniel moved with a silent grace that spoke of years of experience stalking prey or avoiding becoming prey himself. At the door, he paused, listening, then pushed it open with the barrel of his gun. The cabin was empty, but it had been thoroughly searched. Drawers had been pulled out, bedding overturned, cupboards left open. On the table, Beatrice's blood-stained wedding dress lay spread out like a macabre display. "They know," she whispered, staring at the dress she had stuffed into a sack and hidden under the bed. "They know I'm alive, and they know I'm here." Nathaniel quickly checked the rest of the small cabin, then the lean-to stable. "Horses are still here," he reported. "They can't have gone far. We need to move now." "Where?" Beatrice asked, her mind racing with fear. "If they found this place, they could find us anywhere." "Not anywhere," Nathaniel said grimly. "There's an old mining cabin up in the high country. It's almost impossible to find if you don't know it's there. We can hole up there until the sheriff catches up to these bastards." They worked quickly, gathering only the essentials: food, water, ammunition, bedrolls. Nathaniel saddled both horses while Beatrice tied their supplies into bundles. Within 20 minutes, they were ready to leave. As Nathaniel helped Beatrice mount his second horse, a sturdy paint mare, he glanced back at the cabin that had been his home for the past 2 years. "Shame to leave it," he said, a hint of regret in his voice. "But it's just wood and nails. Can always build another." Beatrice felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry I brought this trouble to your door." Nathaniel swung up onto his own horse, a tall black gelding. "Don't apologize for surviving," he said firmly. "Now let's ride before those boys get back with reinforcements." They set off at a quick pace, following a barely visible trail that wound up into the foothills. Nathaniel led the way, occasionally stopping to check behind them or to obscure their tracks where the ground was soft enough to show hoofprints. The terrain grew steeper, the forest thicker. Beatrice, who had grown up riding but hadn't been on a horse in months, found her muscles protesting the unfamiliar exercise. Still, she pressed on without complaint, understanding the urgency of their flight. By mid-afternoon, they had climbed high enough that Beatrice could look back and see the vast expanse of desert and grassland stretching out below them. Nathaniel's cabin was invisible from this height, lost among the sea of juniper and pinyon pine. "We'll stop here for a short rest," Nathaniel said, reining in his horse beside a small stream. "The horses need water, and so do we." Beatrice dismounted gratefully, her legs shaky beneath her. As she bent to splash water on her face, she noticed Nathaniel scanning the trail behind them, his expression tense. "Do you think they're following us?" she asked. "Hard to say," he replied. "The Wilson boys are ranchers, not trackers." "But they're desperate, and desperate men can be surprisingly resourceful." They rested for only 15 minutes before Nathaniel urged them onward. The trail grew narrower, sometimes disappearing altogether, forcing them to pick their way carefully through rocky terrain. Beatrice marveled at Nathaniel's confidence in navigating this wilderness. Even without a visible path, he never hesitated, moving forward with the certainty of a man returning home. As the sun began to dip toward the western horizon, they finally reached their destination. The mining cabin was little more than a stone hut built into the side of the mountain, its weathered door nearly invisible among the rocks and scrub pine. "It's not much," Nathaniel said as he helped Beatrice dismount, but it's defensible. One approach, solid stone walls, good sight lines down the mountain. Inside, the cabin was spare but sound. A small fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 stools, a narrow cot in one corner. Dust covered every surface, but the roof was intact, and the stone walls promised protection from both weather and bullets. "Who built this place?" Beatrice asked, running a hand along the sturdy stone wall. "Silver prospectors back in the 50s, Nathaniel replied, bringing in their supplies. "They abandoned it when the vein played out. Found it my first year here, used it as a hunting cabin now and then. Not many folks know it exists." He set about making the place habitable while Beatrice unpacked their food supplies. By the time darkness fell, they had a small fire going in the fireplace. The dust had been swept out, and their bedrolls were laid out, Nathaniel's on the floor near the door, Beatrice's on the cot. They ate a simple meal of jerky, biscuits, and coffee, the firelight casting long shadows on the stone walls. Despite the circumstances, Beatrice found herself oddly content in this moment, sharing this small space with a man who had become, in just a few days, someone she trusted completely. "How long do you think we'll need to stay here?" she asked as they finished eating. Nathaniel considered the question. "A few days, maybe a week. The sheriff knows what he's doing. He'll find the Wilson boys eventually. Once they're in custody, it'll be safe for you to return to town." The thought of returning to Silver Creek, to the scene of the massacre at the church, filled Beatrice with dread. And yet, what choice did she have? Her parents were there. Her life, such as it was now, was there. "And what about you?" she asked. "Will you rebuild your cabin?" Nathaniel stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. "Maybe, or maybe it's time to move on. Been in one place too long anyway." The casual way he spoke of uprooting his life and starting over elsewhere struck Beatrice. How different his existence was from hers, free from the expectations and conventions that had always governed her choices. "I envy you sometimes," she admitted. "Your freedom, your self-sufficiency." Nathaniel looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. "Not many would envy this life," he said. "It's lonely, hard, uncertain. But it's yours," Beatrice replied softly. "You answer to no one but yourself. You go where you please, do what you please. For a woman, that kind of freedom is almost unimaginable." A thoughtful expression crossed Nathaniel's face. "Never thought of it that way," he admitted. "Always figured most women wanted security, not freedom." "Perhaps we want both," Beatrice said, "but we're rarely given the choice." Their conversation was interrupted by a sound from outside, a small displacement of gravel, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. Nathaniel was on his feet instantly, gun drawn, signaling for Beatrice to be silent. He moved to the single window, staying to the side to avoid being silhouetted against the firelight. After a tense moment, he relaxed slightly. "Dear," he whispered, moving through the rocks below. Beatrice released the breath she'd been holding. Every sound, every shadow seemed threatening now. How long could they live like this, jumping at every noise, as if reading her thoughts? Nathaniel said, "Try to get some sleep. I'll take the first watch. We're safe here tonight." Beatrice wanted to protest, to insist he needed rest too, but she knew he was right. One of them needed to stay alert. "Wake me for the second watch," she said. "I can handle a gun now, remember?" A ghost of a smile touched Nathaniel's lips. "That you can, Miss Marlowe, that you can." She settled onto the narrow cot, pulling a blanket over herself, fully clothed, her pistol within easy reach. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive. Her mind kept returning to the image of her wedding dress, spread out on Nathaniel's table, a deliberate message from men who wanted her dead. "Nathaniel," she whispered into the dim cabin, not sure if he was listening. "Why are they so determined to find me?" "I didn't do anything to them." There was a long pause before he answered. "You're a witness. You saw their faces, even with the bandanas. In a territory where the law hangs murderers, that makes you dangerous." It was the logical answer, but it did little to comfort Beatrice as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next few days settled into a cautious routine. They took turns keeping watch, though Nathaniel insisted on taking the longer shifts, especially at night. During the day, they ventured out only to check on the horses, kept in a small natural corral formed by a semicircle of boulders, and to refill their water at the nearby stream. On the third day, as they were returning from watering the horses, Nathaniel suddenly froze, his hand shooting out to stop Beatrice. He pointed silently to the ground, where a clear bootprint was visible in a patch of soft earth. "That's not ours," he mouthed, barely audible. Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest. Someone had been here, close to their hiding place. Someone wearing boots, not moccasins like the local Apache sometimes wore. They retreated to the cabin as silently as possible. Inside, Nathaniel barred the door and checked his weapons. "They're getting closer," he said grimly. "We need to be ready." For the rest of the day, they maintained a vigilant watch, taking turns at the window that overlooked the approach to the cabin. By nightfall, no one had appeared, but the tension remained thick in the air. "We should leave," Beatrice suggested as they ate a cold supper, avoiding a fire that might be seen from below. "Find another hiding place." Nathaniel shook his head. "Too risky to move at night in this terrain, and if they are out there, movement would give us away immediately. Better to defend a fixed position than be caught in the open." He was right, of course. Beatrice had come to trust his judgment implicitly over the past week. If Nathaniel Reed said they were safer here, then here they would stay. As darkness settled fully over the mountain, the small cabin became a haven of whispers and shadows. They extinguished their single lantern, relying on the moonlight filtering through the window to see. Nathaniel positioned himself by the door, rifle across his knees, while Beatrice kept watch at the window. "Tell me something," Nathaniel said softly, breaking the tense silence. "Something good, something from before all this." Beatrice understood what he was asking for: a distraction, a moment of normalcy in this night of waiting for violence. She thought for a moment, then began to speak. "When I was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, my father took me fishing at a pond outside town. It was just the two of us, a rare treat since he was always busy with the school. We sat for hours, not catching anything, just talking. He told me stories about when he was young, about meeting my mother, about his dreams for me." The memory warmed her, bringing a smile to her face even in the darkness. "At sunset, I finally caught a tiny fish, so small it was almost laughable, but my father acted like I'd landed a whale. He was so proud, insisted on cooking it for dinner even though it was barely a mouthful. My mother played along, setting the table with her best dishes for this ridiculous little fish." She could hear the smile in Nathaniel's voice when he replied. "Sounds like good folks." "They are," Beatrice agreed. "They wanted so much for me. A good marriage, security, respectability. All the things they thought would make me happy." She paused. "I wonder if they'll still want those same things for me now, after everything that's happened." "Parents always want what's best for their children," Nathaniel said. "Sometimes they just need help seeing what best really means." They fell silent again, the conversation having achieved its purpose of calming their nerves, if only temporarily. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees, a sound both soothing and eerie in the darkness. It was just past midnight when they heard it, the unmistakable sound of a boot scuffing against stone, much closer than the deer had been. Nathaniel was on his feet instantly, moving to join Beatrice at the window. 3 shadows detached themselves from the darkness below, moving cautiously up the slope toward the cabin. Even in the moonlight, Beatrice could see they were armed. "The Wilson boys," she whispered. Nathaniel nodded grimly. "And their ranch hand, they found us." He turned to her, his expression serious. "There's no way out except through them. We're going to have to fight." Fear clawed at Beatrice's throat, but alongside it was a surprising sense of resolve. These men had murdered Charles, had tried to kill her, had driven her from her home and family. She was done running. "Tell me what to do," she said, gripping her pistol. Nathaniel squeezed her shoulder briefly, a gesture of approval and reassurance. They'll try to surround the cabin. I'll take the door, you take the window. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target. We have limited ammunition, so make every shot count. He moved back to the door, positioning himself to the side where he would be protected by the stone wall, but could still fire through any opening. Beatrice stayed at the window, pressing herself against the wall as Nathaniel had taught her. The minutes stretched interminably as they waited for the attack. The Wilson boys and their companion had disappeared from view, but Beatrice could feel their presence, circling the cabin like wolves around a campfire. When it came, the attack was sudden and violent. A volley of shots smashed through the window, showering glass across the floor. Beatrice ducked instinctively, then raised her pistol and fired twice at a shadow moving outside. At the same moment, the door shuddered under a heavy impact, someone trying to break it down. Nathaniel fired through the wood, and a cry of pain rewarded his shot. "Marlowe," a rough voice shouted from outside. "We know you're in there, girl. Come out now and we'll make it quick." "Go to hell," Beatrice shouted back, surprising herself with her boldness. A harsh laugh answered her. "Fiery one, ain't she? No wonder Winters wanted to marry her. Shame he had to die for his daddy's sins." "Wilson," Nathaniel called out, "this doesn't have to end with more bloodshed. The sheriff knows it was you at the church. He's got posses all over the territory looking for you. Give yourselves up. And hang," the voice replied bitterly. "No thank you, mister. We're already dead men walking. Might as well finish what we started first." Another barrage of bullets splintered the wood around the window frame. Beatrice returned fire, her hands surprisingly steady despite the chaos around her. "They're trying to keep us pinned down while they get into position," Nathaniel said, his voice calm despite the danger. "Watch the back wall. It's stone, but the mortar's old. They might try to break through." No sooner had he spoken than a scraping sound came from the rear of the cabin. Beatrice swung around, aiming her pistol at the back wall where the sound was loudest. When a section of the old mortar crumbled and a hand appeared, pushing stones aside, she didn't hesitate. She fired, and the hand disappeared with a howl of pain. "Good shot," Nathaniel approved. "But they'll try again. We need to end this quickly." He was right. They couldn't sustain a siege. Ammunition was limited, and the cabin, while defensible, wasn't impregnable. Sooner or later, the Wilson boys would find a way in. A wild idea formed in Beatrice's mind. "Nathaniel," she whispered urgently, "what if I surrendered?" "Absolutely not," he replied immediately, his tone brooking no argument. "Listen," she insisted. "I could distract them, draw them out. Give you a clear shot." Nathaniel abandoned his position by the door long enough to grasp her shoulders, his eyes fierce in the darkness. "That's not happening, Beatrice. I didn't pull you half dead from the desert just to watch you sacrifice yourself now." The intensity of his words, the protectiveness in his grip, sent a jolt through Beatrice that had nothing to do with fear. In that moment, with bullets flying and death a very real possibility, she realized something that should have been obvious days ago. She was falling in love with Nathaniel Reed. The realization shook her, but before she could process it, a new sound cut through the night hoofbeats, many of them, approaching rapidly from below. "What the?" one of the Wilson boys exclaimed outside. "Sheriff's posse?" a new voice bellowed. "Drop your weapons and put your hands in the air." For a moment, everything went silent. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted outside as the Wilson boys apparently decided to fight rather than surrender. Shouts and the thunder of more hoofbeats filled the air. Nathaniel pulled Beatrice away from the window, shielding her with his body as bullets flew wildly in all directions. They crouched together in the center of the small cabin, listening to the battle raging outside. It ended as suddenly as it had begun. The gunfire ceased, replaced by authoritative voices giving orders and the sounds of men being restrained. "Reed," a deep voice called. "Nathaniel Reed, you in there?" Nathaniel relaxed slightly, recognizing the voice. "Sheriff Davis," he said to Beatrice, "we're safe now." He stood up, keeping Beatrice behind him as he approached the door. "I'm here, Sheriff," he called. "Miss Marlowe is with me. We're coming out." He unbarred the door and pushed it open cautiously. Outside, the scene was illuminated by several lanterns held by members of the posse. 3 bodies lay on the ground, the Wilson brothers and their loyal ranch hand. Sheriff Davis, a tall man with a silver mustache, stood in the center of the clearing, his badge glinting in the lantern light. "Reed," he acknowledged with a nod. "Heard you might be in trouble up here." "Seems we arrived just in time." "How did you know where to find us?" Nathaniel asked, helping Beatrice step over the threshold. The sheriff's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Beatrice, alive and unharmed. "Miss Marlowe," he said, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "Your mother will be mighty relieved. As for how we found you, one of my deputies spotted horse tracks heading up this way. Not many folks know about this old mining cabin, but Reed here used to mention it sometimes when he guided hunting parties." Beatrice looked up at Nathaniel, who shrugged. "Guess I wasn't as secretive as I thought." Sheriff Davis gestured to the bodies on the ground. "These the men who shot up the church," Nathaniel nodded. "The Wilson boys and their foreman, seems they blamed the Winters family for Jacob Wilson's death." "Damn shame," the sheriff said, shaking his head. "Jacob was a good man before he lost everything, never thought his boys would take it this far." He turned to Beatrice. "Miss Marlowe, when you're ready, there's a horse waiting to take you back to town. Your parents are beside themselves with worry." The mention of her parents brought a rush of emotion to Beatrice. After everything that had happened, the thought of seeing them again, of being held in her mother's arms, was overwhelming. But as she looked at Nathaniel, standing tall and steady beside her, she felt a different kind of longing. The past week had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The thought of returning to Silver Creek, to the life that had been planned for her, suddenly felt like stepping backward. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said, "but I think I'll ride back with Mr. Reed, if that's all right. We've been through quite a lot together." The sheriff raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. "As you wish, Miss Marlowe. We'll escort you both down the mountain at first light. Too dangerous to travel these trails in the dark." As the posse set up camp for the night, Beatrice and Nathaniel returned to the cabin to gather their belongings. In the privacy of the small stone room, Beatrice finally found the courage to speak the thoughts that had been forming in her mind. "Nathaniel," she began, her voice soft but determined. "When we get back to town, what happens then?" He paused in rolling up his bedding, his back to her. "You go home to your parents, He hesitated. "I find somewhere new to settle, I suppose. My cabin's likely not salvageable after the Wilson boys went through it." Beatrice took a step toward him. "And that's it. After everything we've been through, we just go our separate ways." Nathaniel turned to face her, his expression guarded. "What are you suggesting, Beatrice? You've just lost your fiancé. You've been through a trauma most people couldn't imagine. This isn't the time for whatever you might be thinking." "Isn't it?" Beatrice challenged, taking another step closer. "Charles is gone, that future is gone, but I'm still here. I survived because of you. Because you found me in the desert, because you protected me, because you taught me to protect myself." Nathaniel shook his head, though he didn't back away from her approach. "That doesn't mean you owe me anything." "This isn't about owing," Beatrice said firmly. "This is about choosing. For the first time in my life, I'm making a choice based on what I want, not what others expect of me." She was standing directly in front of him now, close enough to see the conflict in his blue eyes. "And what is it you want, Beatrice Marlowe?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You," she answered simply. "I want you, Nathaniel Reed. Not because you saved me, but because in saving me you showed me who you are. A man of honor, of kindness, of unwavering strength." Nathaniel's hands came up to gently grasp her upper arms, not pulling her closer but not pushing her away either. "Beatrice," he said, her name a warning and a plea all at once. "The town will talk. Your reputation, let them talk," Beatrice interrupted. "My reputation was going to be built on being Charles Winters' wife. That future died with him. Now I get to decide what kind of woman I want to be, what kind of life I want to lead." She reached up, placing a hand against his cheek. "And I want a life with the kind of man who looks at a woman in a blood-stained wedding dress and still sees a bride. A man who values strength and courage over propriety and appearances." Nathaniel's resolve was visibly weakening, his eyes softening as they held hers. "It won't be easy," he warned. "I'm not a wealthy man. I can't offer you the kind of life Winters could have." "I don't want that life," Beatrice assured him. "I want a real one, with joys and sorrows and challenges we face together, with a man who sees me as an equal, not a possession." The last of Nathaniel's resistance crumbled. He pulled her to him, one hand cradling the back of her head as his lips found hers in a kiss that was both tender and fiercely possessive. Beatrice melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Really sure," Beatrice smiled, feeling more certain than she had about anything in her life. "More sure than I was about walking down that aisle a week ago," she answered honestly. A shadow crossed Nathaniel's face. "Your parents may not approve." "Then we'll have to convince them," Beatrice said. "My father is a reasonable man. And my mother, for all her focus on propriety, wants my happiness above all else. They'll come around." Nathaniel nodded slowly, his thumbs tracing circles on her shoulders. "So we ride into town tomorrow, and then what?" "Then we face whatever comes next together," Beatrice said simply. "We talk to my parents. We build a new life somewhere. I don't care where, as long as we're together." Nathaniel's smile was slow and warm, transforming his entire face. "I know a place," he said, "north of here in Colorado territory. Good land near a growing town. I've had my eye on it for a while. Could build a proper homestead there, not just a bachelor's cabin." The image he painted a real home, built by Nathaniel's hands, where they could forge a life together filled Beatrice with a joy she had never expected to feel again after the tragedy at the church. "It sounds perfect," she whispered, reaching up to kiss him again. Outside, the members of the posse were settling in for the night, unaware of the new beginning taking shape within the stone walls of the old mining cabin. Tomorrow would bring challenges, explanations to her parents, whispers from the townsfolk, practical arrangements for their future. But tonight, in this moment, Beatrice Marlowe felt only certainty and hope. The journey back to Silver Creek the next morning was solemn but peaceful. The bodies of the Wilson boys and their foreman were draped over their horses, a grim procession that would bring closure to the tragedy at the church. Beatrice rode beside Nathaniel, their horses close enough that their knees occasionally touched, a subtle reminder of their new understanding. As they approached the town, Beatrice felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. The last time she had seen these streets, these buildings, she had been a different woman, an innocent bride-to-be with her future neatly planned out before her. Now she was returning changed, hardened in some ways, but also more alive than she had ever been. People emerged from shops and homes as the posse rode down Main Street, word of their approach having preceded them. Faces registered shock at the sight of Beatrice, alive and apparently unharmed, riding alongside the reclusive trapper everyone knew as Reed. When they reached the sheriff's office, a cry went up from the boardwalk. "Beatrice! Oh, my baby girl." Elizabeth Marlowe pushed through the gathering crowd, her husband John close behind her. Beatrice dismounted quickly, falling into her mother's embrace with tears streaming down her face. "Mama," she sobbed, inhaling the familiar lavender scent of her mother's perfume. "Papa. I'm so sorry for what you've been through." Her father joined the embrace, his arms encircling both his wife and daughter. "You're alive," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's all that matters." Over her mother's shoulder, Beatrice saw Nathaniel dismounting, standing awkwardly to the side as the family reunion unfolded. She gently disentangled herself from her parents' arms and reached out a hand to him. "Mama, Papa," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "This is Nathaniel Reed." He saved my life. If not for him, I would have died in the desert that day." John Marlowe extended his hand to Nathaniel, gratitude evident in his expression. "Mr. Reed, we can never repay what you've done for our daughter." Nathaniel shook the offered hand firmly. "No repayment necessary, sir." Anyone would have done the same. Elizabeth Marlowe wiped tears from her eyes, studying the tall cowboy with open curiosity. "You must come to dinner," she insisted. "Tonight, we want to hear everything about how you found our Beatrice." Before Nathaniel could respond, Sheriff Davis approached, his expression somber. "Folks, I hate to interrupt, but there are matters that need attending to. Miss Marlowe, I'll need a full statement from you about what happened at the church. And Mr. Reed, I'd appreciate your account of the events up at the mining cabin." Beatrice nodded, understanding the necessity. "Of course, Sheriff, but first, I'd like to go home and change." She gestured to her borrowed clothes, the simple blue calico dress Nathaniel had bought her, now dusty from the trail. "Certainly," the sheriff agreed. "Come by my office when you're ready. No rush, those boys aren't going anywhere now." He nodded toward the bodies being unloaded from the horses. As Beatrice walked with her parents toward their home at the edge of town, she was acutely aware of Nathaniel watching her go. She glanced back, meeting his eyes with a small smile that contained a promise. This is not goodbye. The Marlowe home was exactly as Beatrice remembered it, neat, modest, filled with books and the small treasures her mother had collected over the years. Stepping inside felt like entering a dream, a glimpse of a life that no longer quite fit. Her mother immediately busied herself heating water for a bath, while her father sat Beatrice down at the kitchen table and poured her a cup of tea with hands that trembled slightly. "We thought we'd lost you," he said quietly. "When the shooting started, your mother and I were separated in the chaos. By the time I found her outside the church, you were nowhere to be seen. Some said you'd been taken, others that you'd been killed and your body hidden." Beatrice reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I ran," she admitted. "After Charles was shot, after the screaming started, I just ran. I wasn't thinking clearly, I just knew I had to get away." Her father nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course you did. Survival instinct, nothing to be ashamed of." Her mother returned, wiping her hands on her apron. "Bath's ready in a few minutes, dear. I've laid out a clean dress for you." She hesitated. Your wedding dress. We found it at that man Reed's cabin when the sheriff went looking for clues about where you might have gone." Beatrice tensed slightly. "It was ruined, Mama, Charles's blood." Elizabeth Marlowe sat down heavily, tears welling in her eyes again. "Such a tragedy, poor Charles, and on your wedding day of all days." "The Winters family is devastated," her father added. "Mr. Winters hasn't opened the bank since it happened. They're saying he might sell it and move back east." Beatrice felt a pang of sadness for Charles's parents. Despite her complicated feelings about the marriage that would have been, she had liked them, and they had always been kind to her. "I should pay my respects," she said softly, "after everything is settled with the sheriff." Her mother nodded approvingly. "That would be proper, and then, after a suitable period of mourning." She trailed off, clearly already thinking of the future, of how to salvage her daughter's prospects. Beatrice exchanged a glance with her father, who seemed to sense her discomfort. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Elizabeth," he said gently. "Beatrice has been through an ordeal. She needs time." Of course," her mother agreed quickly. "I'm just saying you're still young, dear." 22 is hardly a spinster, once enough time has passed. "Mama," Beatrice interrupted, deciding there was no point in delaying the inevitable conversation. "There's something I need to tell you both, about Mr. Reed, about my plans." Her parents exchanged a look, a silent communication born of decades of marriage. Her father's expression was one of dawning understanding, while her mother's remained puzzled. "What about Mr. Reed?" Elizabeth asked. "He seems a decent enough man, if a bit rough around the edges." "Certainly we're grateful to him for protecting you." Beatrice took a deep breath. "It's more than gratitude, Mama. During our time together hiding from the Wilson boys, we grew close, very close." Her mother's eyes widened as comprehension set in. Beatrice Marlowe. Surely you're not suggesting. I love him, Mama, Beatrice said simply, and he loves me. We want to build a life together. The silence that followed her declaration was deafening. Her father was the first to break it, his voice carefully measured. This is unexpected, Beatrice. You've known this man for what, a week? After experiencing a terrible trauma, are you certain these feelings are genuine? It was a fair question, one Beatrice had asked herself. I understand your concern, Papa, but yes, I'm certain, what Nathaniel and I experienced together. It revealed our true characters to each other in a way that years of conventional courtship never could. I know who he is, deep down, where it matters most. Her mother had recovered from her initial shock and was now frowning deeply. But he's a trapper, Beatrice. A drifter. What kind of life could he possibly offer you? He's more than that, Beatrice defended. He's educated, thoughtful. He was a soldier before he came west, and he has plans for a proper homestead in Colorado. Colorado? Her mother exclaimed. So far away, and what of your reputation? Living alone with this man for days, the town is already talking. Beatrice had expected this reaction, but it still stung. My reputation was going to be as Charles's widow, Mama. That was going to be my identity. Now I have a chance to build a different life, one of my own choosing. Her father, always the more pragmatic of her parents, leaned forward. What exactly are you asking of us, Beatrice? Our blessing for this? Relationship? Yes, Beatrice said, meeting his gaze steadily. Your blessing and your understanding. Nathaniel is coming to dinner tonight. Get to know him. See the man I see. That's all I ask. John Marlowe sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. You've always had a good head on your shoulders, Beatrice. Even as a child, you were sensible, thoughtful. If you say this man is worthy of your affection, I'm inclined to trust your judgment. John, Elizabeth protested, you can't possibly be encouraging this. I'm not encouraging anything, he replied calmly. I'm suggesting we meet the man properly before passing judgment. Our daughter has been through hell, Elizabeth. If she's found something good in the midst of all that tragedy, who are we to stand in her way? Beatrice felt a rush of gratitude toward her father. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a beginning. Now, John said, rising from the table, I believe there's a bath waiting for you, Beatrice. And after that, the sheriff needs your statement. We can continue this discussion over dinner. It was a dismissal, but a gentle one. Beatrice knew her parents needed time to process what she had told them to adjust their expectations for her future. She could give them that much. The bath was a luxury Beatrice hadn't realized how much she'd missed. Soaking in the warm water, scrubbing away the dust and grime of the past week, she felt like she was washing away her old self as well. The girl who had walked down the aisle in that white dress no longer existed. In her place was a woman who had faced death, who had fired a gun in her own defense, who had chosen her own path. Afterward, dressed in a simple gray dress from her wardrobe, one of the few not specifically purchased for her trousseau, Beatrice made her way to the sheriff's office. The townspeople she passed on the street stared openly, some offering hesitant greetings, others whispering behind their hands as she walked by. At the sheriff's office, Beatrice found Nathaniel just finishing his own statement. He stood as she entered, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her. Sheriff Davis, observing the look that passed between them, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Miss Marlowe, he said instead, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for coming. I just need your account of what happened at the church and afterward. Beatrice recounted the events, as clearly as she could, the wedding ceremony interrupted by gunfire, Charles's death in her arms, her panicked flight into the desert. She described how Nathaniel had found her, taken her to his cabin, and later to the mining cabin when the Wilson boys discovered their location. Throughout her telling, Nathaniel remained in the office, a solid, reassuring presence by the door. When she described the final confrontation at the mining cabin, he occasionally added details, their accounts aligning perfectly. Well, Sheriff Davis said when they had finished, setting down his pencil, That matches what we've pieced together from other witnesses. The Wilson boys and their foreman were clearly out for revenge against the Winters family. Tragic all around. He closed his notebook. I believe that concludes our official business, Miss Marlowe. You're free to go. As they stepped out onto the boardwalk, Nathaniel turned to Beatrice. I should find a room at the hotel, he said. Get cleaned up before dinner with your parents. Beatrice nodded, suddenly shy in this public setting. Mama's expecting you at 6. It won't be anything fancy. I'm not a fancy man, Nathaniel reminded her with a small smile. I just hope I don't embarrass you in front of your folks. Never, Beatrice assured him. Just be yourself. That's the man she caught herself, aware of curious onlookers nearby. That's the man they need to meet, she finished instead. Nathaniel understood her meaning regardless. I'll see you at 6 then, he said, tipping his hat before heading toward the hotel. Beatrice watched him go, his tall figure standing out among the townspeople on the street. Whatever happened at dinner tonight, whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Dinner that evening was a tense affair, at least initially. Elizabeth Marlowe had prepared her best dishes: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and set the table with the good china usually reserved for Christmas and Easter. Her way of acknowledging the importance of the occasion, Beatrice supposed, even if her mother was still skeptical of Nathaniel himself. Nathaniel arrived precisely at 6, freshly bathed and wearing what appeared to be new clothes: a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a vest that actually fit him properly. He had even trimmed his beard, revealing more of the strong jawline beneath. When Beatrice opened the door to him, she was momentarily speechless at the transformation. You look, she began, then smiled. Very handsome. A hint of color touched Nathaniel's cheeks. Figured I should make an effort, he said quietly. First impressions and all that. John Marlowe greeted Nathaniel with a firm handshake, while Elizabeth offered a polite but reserved nod. As they sat down to dinner, the conversation was stilted at first, with Elizabeth asking Nathaniel carefully neutral questions about the weather and his journey to town. It was John who finally broached more substantial topics, asking about Nathaniel's life before coming to New Mexico. Beatrice listened intently, as eager as her parents to learn more about the man she had given her heart to. I grew up in Pennsylvania, Nathaniel explained, his usual reticence giving way to a desire to present himself honestly to Beatrice's parents. My father was a doctor, my mother a midwife. They taught me to read, to value knowledge. I was studying at the university in Philadelphia when the war broke out. You fought for the Union then? John asked, interest evident in his voice. Nathaniel nodded. 4 years. Started as a private, ended as a captain, saw things I wish I hadn't, did things I'm not proud of. He paused, his expression momentarily distant. After the war, I couldn't settle back into city life, too many ghosts, so I came west looking for space, I guess, room to breathe. Elizabeth, who had been listening carefully, spoke up. And your family, do they remain in Pennsylvania? A shadow crossed Nathaniel's face. My parents died during the war. Influenza outbreak in '63. I have a sister in Boston, married to a banker. We write occasionally. I'm sorry for your loss, Elizabeth said, genuine sympathy softening her expression for the first time. It must have been difficult, losing them while you were away fighting. It was, Nathaniel acknowledged. Made coming home even harder. Nothing to come home to, really. Beatrice reached under the table to squeeze his hand, moved by this glimpse into the pain that had shaped him. Nathaniel returned the pressure briefly before continuing. That's partly why the idea of a homestead appeals to me, he said, looking directly at John. A place to put down roots, something permanent after years of drifting. John nodded slowly. Colorado, Beatrice mentioned. Why there? Good land, fair prices. Growing settlements, but still enough wilderness to suit me, and its beautiful country mountains, forests, rivers, the kind of place where a man could build something worthwhile. As the meal progressed, the conversation flowed more naturally. By the time Elizabeth served apple pie for dessert, Nathaniel was discussing books with John. They shared a fondness for Thoreau, and even Elizabeth had warmed enough to ask his opinion on the best wood for furniture making. When the meal was finished, John invited Nathaniel to join him for a pipe on the porch. Beatrice helped her mother clear the table, watching anxiously through the window as the two men settled into the porch chairs, their profiles illuminated by the setting sun. "He's not what I expected," Elizabeth admitted as she washed a plate. "More civilized," Beatrice smiled, accepting the wet plate to dry. "What did you expect, Mama? A wild man in buckskins, grunting instead of speaking." "Don't be smart," her mother chided, but there was no real reproach in her tone. "You have to admit, a trapper who lives alone in the wilderness doesn't sound like the kind of man who quotes Shakespeare." Beatrice hadn't known Nathaniel could quote Shakespeare. Clearly, her father had drawn out aspects of him that even she hadn't seen yet. The thought warmed her that there was still so much to discover about the man she loved. "He's an extraordinary man, Mama," she said softly. "I know this isn't what you wanted for me. It's not the future you and Papa planned, but it's the future I choose." Elizabeth sighed, her hands stilling in the dishwater. "I just want you to be taken care of, Beatrice, to be secure. The life you're describing, a homestead in Colorado, starting from nothing, it will be hard. So much harder than what you would have had as Charles's wife." "I know," Beatrice acknowledged, "but it will be real, something we build together as equals, and Nathaniel." She glanced out the window again, where he was now gesturing animatedly as he spoke with her father. "Nathaniel sees me, Mama, not as a possession or an ornament, but as a person, a partner." Her mother studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You love him," she said, not a question but a recognition. "Truly love him." "I do," Beatrice confirmed, "more than I thought possible." Elizabeth dried her hands on her apron, then reached out to cup Beatrice's cheek. "Then I suppose we'll have to get used to the idea of visiting Colorado," she said with a small smile. "Your father was talking about retiring from teaching soon anyway." It wasn't quite a blessing, but it was acceptance. Beatrice hugged her mother tightly, grateful beyond words for her understanding. On the porch, a similar conversation was unfolding between Nathaniel and John. After discussing literature and philosophy, John testing Nathaniel's education, and finding it surprisingly comprehensive, the older man had finally come to the heart of the matter. "My daughter tells me you intend to marry her," he said, his pipe smoke curling in the evening air. Nathaniel nodded, his expression serious. "Yes, sir, if you'll give your blessing." "And if I don't?" Nathaniel considered the question carefully. "Then we would both be disappointed," he answered honestly, "but it wouldn't change how we feel. Beatrice is a grown woman, capable of making her own choices. I respect your position as her father, but ultimately, this is her decision." John's eyebrows rose slightly, then he nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. "Good answer. Too many men would either lie about respecting my wishes or dismiss them entirely." He tapped his pipe against the porch railing. "Tell me about this homestead in Colorado. Is it just talk, or do you have real plans?" "Real plans," Nathaniel assured him. "I've been saving for 3 years. Have enough to buy 160 acres under the Homestead Act, plus materials for a proper house, not just a cabin. The land I'm looking at is about 5 miles from a growing town called Pine Creek. Good soil, plenty of water, timber for building. It would be a working farm eventually." "And where does Beatrice fit into these plans? Have you considered what this life would mean for her? She's been raised in town, educated, accustomed to certain comforts." Nathaniel leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Mr. Marlowe, one of the things I admire most about your daughter is her strength, her adaptability. In the past week, I've seen her face death, learn to shoot, sleep on the ground, and never once complain. She's remarkable." Pride flickered across John's face. "She is that," he agreed. "Gets it from her mother, though Elizabeth would never admit it. My wife came west as a bride of 18, leaving behind a comfortable life in St. Louis. Never regretted it, she says, though I know there were hard years. I would do everything in my power to make Beatrice's life as comfortable as possible, Nathaniel promised. The house would be built before we settled there permanently, and I wouldn't expect her to take on more than she could handle. We'd grow into the life together. John studied him thoughtfully. You know, Reed, when I first laid eyes on you riding into town with my daughter, I had my doubts. Thought perhaps you'd taken advantage of her vulnerability, her gratitude, but watching you with her, listening to you speak about her. I believe your feelings are genuine. Nathaniel met his gaze steadily. They are, sir, more genuine than anything I've felt in my life. Then you have my blessing, John said simply, though I expect you to make an honest woman of her before you take her to Colorado. The town gossips have already had a field day with your time alone together. A proper wedding would quiet some of that talk. A wedding, Nathaniel repeated, the word clearly stirring complicated emotions given what had happened at Beatrice's last attempt to marry. Of course. Whatever Beatrice wants. The two men fell silent, contemplating the future that was taking shape through their conversation. Inside the house, Beatrice and her mother had finished the dishes and were discussing the practicalities of Beatrice's new path, what she would need. What she could take from her parents' home, what would have to be purchased new. As twilight deepened into night, Nathaniel rose to take his leave. At the door, Beatrice stepped outside with him, closing the door behind her for a moment of privacy. How did it go with my father? She asked, searching his face in the dim light of the porch lantern. Nathaniel's smile was answer enough. He gave his blessing. Said we should marry before leaving for Colorado. Marry, Beatrice echoed, the word catching in her throat. Another wedding. Understanding crossed Nathaniel's face. It doesn't have to be anything like before, he said gently. Just us, your parents, a judge or preacher, simple and quiet. Beatrice nodded, grateful for his sensitivity. Yes, that sounds perfect. She paused, then added with a small smile, no white dress this time. You'd be beautiful in anything, Nathaniel told her, his voice low and sincere. Even a blood-stained wedding dress. The reference to his words on that first night, "You're still a bride in my eyes," brought tears to Beatrice's eyes. She reached up to touch his face, wondering at the journey that had brought them here, from that desperate night in the desert, to this moment of quiet promise on her parents' porch. I love you, Nathaniel Reed, she whispered, with all my heart. And I love you, Beatrice Marlowe, he replied, bending to kiss her softly. Soon to be Beatrice Reed. Behind them, the door opened slightly, Elizabeth Marlowe's voice calling out, Beatrice, it's getting late, Mr. Reed should be on his way. Nathaniel chuckled against Beatrice's lips. Some things never change, he murmured, mothers protecting their daughters' reputations. Go, Beatrice said, pushing him gently toward the steps. I'll see you tomorrow. As she watched him walk away down the moonlit street, Beatrice felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The path ahead would not be easy, but it would be hers chosen freely, walked alongside a man who valued her for exactly who she was. 3 weeks later, Beatrice Marlowe became Beatrice Reed in a simple ceremony in her parents' parlor. She wore a dress of soft, blue the color of Nathaniel's eyes, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers he had gathered that morning. The only guests were her parents, Sheriff Davis as a witness, and the preacher from the neighboring town, as Silver Creek's own preacher had been among those killed on that terrible day. As Nathaniel slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, Beatrice felt not the nervous anticipation she had experienced with Charles, but a deep, settled certainty. This was right. This was where she belonged. After a wedding dinner prepared by Elizabeth, Beatrice and Nathaniel left for their journey to Colorado. They traveled light, with only what could be carried on their horses and a small wagon, planning to send for the rest of Beatrice's belongings once they were settled. The journey north took nearly 3 weeks, through landscapes more beautiful and varied than Beatrice had ever imagined. Each night, they made camp under the stars, and Nathaniel showed her the constellations, teaching her to navigate by the night sky. Each day they rode side by side, talking of their plans, their hopes, their shared future. When they finally reached Pine Creek, Colorado, Beatrice was surprised by the bustling little town. It was larger than Silver Creek, with a proper hotel, several stores, a school, and even a small library. But it was the land beyond the town that took her breath away, rolling meadows backed by majestic mountains, forests of pine and aspen, streams of clear, cold water. Nathaniel led her to a rise overlooking a valley where a small creek wound its way through meadow grass. "This is it," he said, his arm around her waist. "Our land, 160 acres, from that big pine at the creek bend all the way to those rocks on the far hill." Beatrice surveyed what would be their home, trying to imagine it as Nathaniel described a 2-story house near the creek, fields of wheat and corn, an orchard, a barn for horses and cattle. It was empty now, untamed, but she could see the potential. Could see their life taking shape here. "It's perfect," she said, leaning into his embrace. "When do we start building?" Nathaniel kissed the top of her head. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll stay in town until the house is livable. I've arranged for help a few men from town who know carpentry. Should have the basic structure up before winter sets in." "And I'll help," Beatrice said firmly. "Don't look surprised. I may not know how to build a house, but I can learn." Nathaniel laughed, the sound echoing across the valley that would be their home. "I never doubted it for a moment, Mrs. Reed. Not for a single moment." 5 years later, Beatrice Reed stood on the porch of their 2-story farmhouse, watching as Nathaniel taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, where their second child, a daughter, she was certain would arrive within the month. The homestead had flourished beyond even Nathaniel's hopeful predictions. The house, solidly built of local timber, stood proud and welcoming at the heart of their land. Fields of wheat and corn stretched to the east, an orchard of apple and cherry trees to the west. A barn housed their horses and milk cows, and a chicken coop provided eggs and meat. Beatrice had indeed learned to build alongside her husband. Her hands bore calluses from work. Her skin was tanned from days in the Colorado sun, and her once fashionable dresses had been replaced by practical skirts and blouses. But she had never been happier or felt more fulfilled. The nightmares of that blood-soaked wedding day had faded, replaced by dreams of the future they were building together. Occasionally, when Beatrice unpacked the trunk containing her few keepsakes from Silver Creek, she would catch a glimpse of a scrap of white fabric, a piece of her wedding dress that her mother had salvaged, cleaned, and sewn into a small handkerchief. It no longer brought pain, only a reminder of the twisted path that had led her to where she truly belonged. As she watched, James successfully guided his pony in a small circle, his face alight with pride as he looked to his father for approval. Nathaniel's answering smile was radiant, his love for his son evident in every line of his body. Beatrice thought back to that night in the desert, when a stranger had left water and a blanket for a terrified woman in a blood-stained wedding dress. How could she have known then that the tragedy she was fleeing would lead her to the greatest happiness she had ever known? Nathaniel looked up, catching her watching them. He said something to James, then crossed the yard to join her on the porch, his hand automatically reaching for hers. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed regularly, as if making sure the life they had built together was truly what she wanted. "Completely," Beatrice assured him, guiding his hand to rest on her belly where their daughter kicked vigorously. "Perfectly, utterly happy." Nathaniel bent to kiss her, his lips as warm and certain as they had been on that night on her parents' porch 5 years earlier. "Me too," he murmured against her mouth. "More than I ever thought possible." From the yard, James called out, demanding their attention for his riding skills. They turned together, arms around each other, to watch their son, the future they had created, the love they had built, the life they had chosen. And in that moment, with the Colorado sun setting behind the mountains and her family gathered close, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not the bride she had once expected to become, but something far better, a woman who had faced death and horror and emerged stronger, who had found love in the most unexpected place, who had built a life of her own choosing. A woman who was still a bride in the eyes of the man who had saved her not just from death in the desert, but from a life half-lived, a future predetermined. With Nathaniel, she was fully herself, fully alive, fully loved. And that, Beatrice Reed knew, was worth everything they had endured to find it.